Good morning again. I'm always pleased to introduce the Iron Speaker. I'm going to be very brief today because I don't want to take his minutes or even seconds. Robert Kopecky was born in San Diego, California. Those California guys are free spirits. And he's one. I've spent the last day and a half with Robert. He lives in New York now with his wife, and he is a free spirit. And I found out that he has spirit, and he has love, and he has kindness, and he has forgiveness. And he's a wonderful individual with a wonderful message. Robert Kopecky.
Thank you so much, Neil. It's such a great pleasure to be here with such great singers, and the Queen of Deviled Eggs is here someplace. This is kind of an unusual format for me to speak in because, and thank you for welcoming me into the fellowship of the Inner Light. I'm around a lot of skeptics a lot of the time, so it's nice to sort of play for the home crowd. I thought I would open with my favorite prayer, particularly because of the significance of the last line in it for me. It's from another animal lover. I'm an animal lover. Lord, make me a channel of thy peace, that where there is hatred I may bring love, that where there is wrong I may bring forgiveness, that where there is discord I may bring harmony, that where there is error I may bring truth, that where there is doubt I may bring faith, that where there is despair I may bring hope, that where there are shadows I may bring light, that where there is sadness I may bring joy. Grant that I may seek rather to comfort than to be comforted, to understand than to be understood, to love than to be loved. For it is by forgetting self that one finds self. It is by forgiving that one is forgiven. It is by dying that one awakens to eternal life. Amen. So that last line is important to me, being a survivor, a 3-time survivor of near-death experiences. I became kind of an unintentional finder of God. It was something that I never expected to have happen in my life. And it reminds me of a story I once heard about a thief who was so desperate for the things of the world that he would steal whatever he could. And he was casing this beautiful manor, a beautiful home with a walled, beautiful garden, waiting for his chance to break in and steal things. And that chance came one night when there was a party going on, and then the party left the manor off to someplace else. And he saw his opportunity, and he climbed the wall and went in through the back, and he was about to start stealing things. And something happened, and the whole party returned unexpectedly to the house. And he got desperate and had no choice, he believed. So he stripped off all his clothes down to his loincloth and hid them, and sat by the beautiful reflecting pond in the backyard in a full lotus position and pretended like he was a Swami. All the returning partiers and stuff came back, and they looked in the backyard, and they said, "My gosh, there's a Swami out in the backyard now. I wonder where he came from. He looks so holy." And they went out and started to approach him and to talk to him. He took on the role of a Swami. He had no choice. And one or two at a time, they would sit and talk to him and tell him about their heart's needs and their desires and their fears. And he had to play the part. And so he engaged with them and started to find that this kind of voice of reason started to come out of him. And his heart began to open. They brought him a little serving of wonderful food that was perfect size for a Swami, and it was delicious, And he started to find he had everything he kind of needed there. And he remained, and days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. And hundreds of people ended up coming to see him and sit with this wise Swami. And just by sitting and by opening his heart and pretending to be that which he never thought he could be, he discovered that he was in fact one with God, and that he had kind of become a Swami. He hadn't even really intended for it to happen. But he realized that this was the truth of his life. In some parts of town, they thought that the thief had died mysteriously. And they were right. They were right. So that, to me, around this time of year, I'll have people say, "Oh, well, you died and came back to life 3 times, so the resurrection story must be very powerful for you, being..." And it's kind of off-putting, but in a way it's something I do identify with powerfully, that the rebirth and renewal, and symbolized by the icons, the cross, the holding on to the horizontal aspect of life on earth, and then being able to release into the transcendent vertical motion, the upward draft of one's soul that I experienced at one time a little too directly for my own liking, but I was driving along an unknown part of town at dusk and had a equipment malfunction and went straight into a telephone pole in my car and broke out the windshield with my head and found myself at the top of the telephone pole, looking down at the scene beneath me of this body that was partially through the broken window and people running out to see what had happened. And I realized that the body beneath me was me. And I was enfolded in this kind of expansive matrix of loving intelligence, just free and whole, a sensation I had never felt before. And there was this aspect of radiance and transcendent connectedness, the vertical movement to the top of the telephone pole, unfortunately. And my guardian angel, who was behind me, I didn't really meet her, but she shepherded me off to a place, a beautiful pastoral place, where I underwent a kind of an interview of sorts. After this experience, I found I had nobody to talk to about it. It wasn't very popular to have near-death experiences then. And I really didn't find any kind of community, and I was sucked back into who I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to be doing. And I went after that again with increased vigor in a way, because I was sort of suppressing this lesson I'd gotten. Some years later, I ended up in this kind of course of confusion, leaving my first wife and moving to New York City and living this completely inappropriate lifestyle that was totally self-destructive. Talk about chemical warfare. I was my own victim of that. And I found myself one night passed out on the floor of my apartment and feeling nothing from the neck down and all the life draining out of me. And the room filled in with a brilliant white cloud. And once again, I was free. I was liberated from the constraints of my physical situation and held in this kind of loving matrix of divine consciousness again. And again, my guardian angel directed me to look into this cloud, and a kind of screen opened up that wasn't like a movie screen, but sort of like a box of experience, a box of time. And I was shown these scenes, pivotal scenes from my life, that wasn't the greatest hits. It was these kind of difficult moments, seminal moments, when I had maybe not been present in a way that I could have been, for opportunities to have been of service, or to come to greater understanding of myself and others, to find love. And the room started to fill back in as my girlfriend at the time was screaming and crying and worried about me, and the whole kind of set of apparitions faded after I experienced 5 or 6 of these scenes where I lacked presence. And still, I didn't really get it yet, I didn't feel like I had anybody I could talk to about it. I remained in confusion, and I kind of fled that lifestyle. I went out to the desert Southwest, and eventually I met somebody, and I was going to get married, and I was in an altercation. I was ambushed by a bunch of roughnecks who came up alongside me while I was riding a bicycle and hit me in the back of the head with a crowbar or something. And these were kind of punk guys, and they stomped and kicked me for a long time. And I found myself in this place that had a more terrestrial quality to it, and I was still kind of attached to these things happening outside, but again I was enfolded in this sort of loving matrix of divine consciousness that I found myself before. And I was surrounded by entities who told me that I had not done things the right way. That was the problem. And that I had to go back there. And I had a sense of what was going on out there, and I did not want to go back. That was not in my plan at all. But as insistent as I was, they were more insistent, and they sort of pushed me through this membrane, and I popped out onto the street, and an emergency medical worker announced that I was back. And I'd had my third near-death experience. And whether you can believe it or not, I still didn't really get it. These had all changed my life dramatically, and when I look back on it, everything that I did from that point on was colored by that. I kind of fled that life in a way too, and came back to New York City, and despite being completely confused and ungrounded in my life, I became more successful financially and professionally than I'd ever been before. I just got hooked right into the whole thing, and it just didn't mean very much for me. And then 9/11 happened, and I was downtown in Manhattan that day. And here was this great spiritual catastrophe. And as I walked on the streets, I could feel this swirl, this cyclonic swirl of these released souls. And I felt it as real as anything I'd ever felt in my life. And I understood something at a level that inspired me to action. I knew that I had to find something in my life, and I ended up going out of town and finding a little house on the upper Delaware River that I retreated to, and I essentially sat on a rock by the river. I know it sounds like a cliche, but I sat on a rock by the river for a long, long time. And sitting there with all the animal spirits and the nature spirits and the Great Spirit, my heart opened up, and love started to flow into me. I began to realize that I had been given these lessons in these near-death experiences. All of that sort of crystallized in me. And I recognized that in my outer body, in my first experience, I'd received the gift of perspective that allows me to detach from the physicality of this life, of these forms, and with loving compassion to witness the vehicles that each person is, and the expression of divine consciousness flowing through that particular filter of their experience. So I don't have to judge or compare or label at all. I can look on with this kind of compassionate detachment in a way, through which I feel even more connected to people. And that gift of spiritual perspective allows us to recognize that we are all one in God, that we're all the same thing, right? This expression of divine consciousness flowing through the forms of our personal experience. I recognized that the second experience that I had, that experience that I call the gift of presence, informed me that in each and every moment, in each and every eternal moment that we experience, like this one right now, when we're all here and we're actually alive, it's not the future or the past. This is the moment in which we can truly be present for one another and for life, and to express love, to remove the obstacles to love in our life, to create our karma, or to repair it, if at all possible, you know? And so that's the gift of presence that I received. And I realized that in the third near-death experience, I had received a gift of purpose, which simply meant that I apparently had a mission. Not just that somebody had been keeping track of everything all the time, but apparently that was the truth too, which is a little scary sometimes, that there is a kind of a book or a reckoning, you know. But that I had a kind of a mission that only I was qualified to fulfill. That only I had what was necessary or what was needed to fit into this kind of plan. And that it might not have been what I thought my mission was going to be for years, which was to be a famous artist or a movie star or something like that. It might be just as simple as showing up for somebody in this kind of sacred agreement and fulfilling that, recognizing myself in the other and becoming whole that way. So that purpose then carried me into my life, and I realized sitting on that rock and having that love of divine consciousness pour through me. I married again to an incredibly beautiful woman who was just absolutely wonderful. I hope to introduce you to her someday. She's really terrific. And I realized that I was experiencing heaven, in that I had a sense of those things that were consistent in each of my experiences. I hadn't gone to a particular place that you could call heaven. Maybe the pastoral place in my first experience was like that, classically, you know. But there were these aspects, this state of being that was what heaven was created from for me. And that was being enfolded into divine consciousness, being a part of divine consciousness without boundaries, right? Living in the mind, the expansive mind of God, so to speak. Experiencing pure love, just complete pure love, just being enfolded in it. Radiant illumination, the kind of thing that you see on a beautiful sunny day, or shining from a child's face. You know, that there is this experience of radiance in the world, the light coming through things. And transcendent unity, the experience of feeling at one and a part of everything. Like standing back from the earth at arm's length and realizing that that is one living thing and I am part of it. And then transcending that delusion of my human separateness, my sense of being who I... Ramana Maharshi, who was also a great Swami, said the problem with I am this or that is this or that. I am a thief, I am a Swami. If you drop the back part, it's a grammatical trick. You're left with I am, which is what we all are, right? So there in that place, realizing heaven on this earth, I experienced that kind of renewal, that restoration, the release of everything that I felt was holding me down to this earth, and the realization of this kind of unity and divine consciousness and the Holy Spirit. I realized that we're all one with God all the time. We just have a problem of misperception. That's the only problem we really have. So how could I align myself with what heaven was supposed to be? How could I bring heaven to this experience of life here, when it seems so unlikely so often? We only get it in little bits and pieces, just a little piece of heaven every once in a while. But in any life we live, there are the same things that mean you're in heaven. For me, it means that everybody is very nice. Right? Like here is very heavenly. Everybody is very nice. And so kindness is one of these principles that we can bring into play in this life to align us spiritually with that aspect of heaven. So being kind to everybody without condition as best as you possibly can be. Heaven is a very truthful place where nobody is manipulating or has ulterior motives or is lying to you for your own good. That doesn't happen. everybody is completely honest with one another, and it simplifies and clarifies and purifies the love that's shared there in that sense of honesty. So being honest as much as one can possibly be. Heaven is a place where nobody is particularly more important than anybody else. It's a horizontal hierarchy where we're all equal in God's eyes. And so everybody is understanding of one another at that fundamental level and open to being taught, being teachable. And that aspect of teachability, of divine guidance, is something that happened in all my near-death experiences too. I was being instructed. And so that being open, being like a beginner, and having humility, real humility, that is one of the most profound powers there is in the entire universe. And when you think of the people that have changed the arc of history, it hasn't been the flashiest, most powerful people. It's been the most powerfully humble people that have made the difference. You also kind of can't do anything wrong that somebody else hasn't done already in heaven. So everybody is very understanding of there. And there is no perfection anywhere. Illusion doesn't end with this world. It continues on. And so forgiveness, and radical forgiveness, is an aspect that we can bring into our lives here that align us spiritually with heaven, with this experience of heaven. Being compassionate, that is feeling the other through your heart as though you were two hearts beating in one, knowing the struggles and the difficulties that are inevitable in this life, and being open-hearted to everyone with that kind of compassionate consciousness is how everybody plays in heaven. That's how it works, right? That's what it's always, I would never imagine a heaven otherwise. And so compassion, that kind of compassionate consciousness, carrying that in your life is also a way to realize those moments more often. And then being of service, because heaven is the kind of place where people will drop anything to give you a hand. Nobody has a problem with stopping whatever they're doing to help you out without any conditions, and from holding the door to giving up their place on the lifeboat. There is no order of magnitude of service that's not appropriate at any time. And so by forgetting ourselves, we find ourselves that way. These aspects of bringing heaven into our life here, and the realization of the beautiful invisible machinery of spiritual technology that's alive in this world through divine consciousness, through the Spirit of God, provides us with spiritual sanity that our one reading about stewardship today also has something to do with how we can realize heaven in this world, is that we are the spiritual stewards of this beautiful planet, this garden. And it is up to us to protect and restore this great beauty through this divine potential that's alive everywhere you look. So, in big part, I think that comes from recognizing love. Love comes out of things, right? If you're open-hearted and you approach life the right way, and it's very easy to do this when you're at dinner, because if somebody cooks with a lot of love, like I imagine we're going to taste today, probably with those double legs, I hope, you recognize the love in the formation, in the creation of that. And you can see it in everything. You can see it in architecture like this, that's warm and encloses a spirit within it. You can see it in architecture that's cold and static and egoic. It's difficult, it proclaims power or dominance. And so you follow those forms of love, creativity, art, nature, the places where it's really obvious. And you can see it coming from people, the degree to which love has played a role in their formation. And the degree to which it hasn't, how much of it you can bring, you know. So when you have somebody who's like an antagonist to you, that you feel is an awful person, and you may be right, you apply a little spiritual perspective and see that this is the struggle coming through the form of their karmic information, their body, and what they need to be expressing. You enter into that moment with presence where you can make a difference, and you recognize your purpose is to remove the obstacles to love in your life and to bring love where you can. So I'd like to finish, and I think maybe that was I'd like to finish. I'd like to finish with this little poem from Rumi. Who you know Rumi, right? Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about language, ideas. Even the phrase, each other, doesn't make any sense. Thank you.